now. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this week's Inspiring Leadership Podcast. And all the way from America, I have Dan Helfrich. And Dan is the CEO of Deloitte Consulting. I've always been a big fan of Deloitte Consulting, having been in PwC Consulting. We always tipped our hat to them, though we didn't want to admit it. It's a bit like sort of admitting you're in the Dutch team and that the English have just beaten you at football, but we won't mention that, the football. But Dan was the one who told me some time ago when England was scrubbing around at the beginning of the Euros that England are going to do really well and probably will win. And so now we're up against Spain in the finals on Sunday. We will see if Dan's predictions are right. And he's done pretty well so far. Dan, welcome. Great to have you on the Inspiring Leadership Podcast.
Looking forward to it, Jonathan.
Well, thank you very much indeed. Just tell us all for the benefits. I mean, many people have heard of Deloitte Consulting, but some in the 130 countries around the world that listen to this won't have. So how does your firm help leaders and teams? Because obviously that's the topic of this conversation. But how does Deloitte Consulting in America help leaders and teams? You've got about 80, 90,000 people. It's a lot of people.
Look, what we do is help people navigate change. And change comes in lots of forms and fashions right now. Change comes in technology forms. Change comes in geopolitical forms. Change comes in regulatory forms. Change comes in new competitive forms. And so when change is in the fabric of an organization, sometimes the right thing to do is to ask an outsider or a third party to help you navigate that change, either to capitalize to create new growth and opportunity, to mitigate the risk that comes with the change. And so, look, we're in the change business and we're pretty good at it. And so we end up serving most of the large organizations in the world, whether those are private companies or governments. And we do have 80 or 90,000 people who love the sport of rolling up their sleeves and helping their clients succeed. Not us, but our success comes in the form of our clients achieving great outcomes.
Yeah. And I must say, my son-in-law is working for Deloitte Consulting in the UK, Sandeep Suni, and, again, learns a lot. And I know that when I left the British Army after 20 years and went into business, I chose to go into PricewaterhouseCoopers Consulting and learned so much about so many different clients and businesses that I felt well prepared when I eventually became a managing director myself in a public limited company, that I'd sort of learned from others' lessons. But at the same time, I love helping people. I love learning from people. And I was surrounded by some very bright men and women who genuinely care about their client and they want to learn. And in some cases, they sometimes stay with the client. They work with them for a bit, and the client goes, "We like you and we like, what you bring, come across to us." That happens, but then you've got your alumni all around the world in different organizations. And unless you've treated them badly, they are going to think well of you, but not in a sort of mafia style of McKinsey, but certainly they are going to be looking out for when you can help the organization. No, that's really great. And you and I were talking before we started about your guests that you'd like me to have on the show that you know well enough and you respect. You had three, a couple, and then two other people. Would you tell us why you particularly would point out these people as inspiring leaders and what they do, and what their qualities are that you admire?
Yeah. And I'm going to give you a fourth because it ties to your comment just now about alumni. First person I think about, who I don't know super well, is Mary Dillon. Mary Dillon's the CEO of a really interesting global brand, Foot Locker. And she's had an incredible career in a bunch of different retail and fashion. And she gets the chance to transform in very fundamental ways this well-known brand of Foot Locker, but in a modern digital way. So Mary. The second is a couple, Stephen and Aisha Curry. Those of your listeners who know basketball, know Stefan as one of the greatest basketball players of our generation, but he and his wife have taken their fame and created several very meaningful organizations as a result of it, many of which are domiciled and focused locally in the Oakland, San Francisco Bay Area. And they do it with humility. They do it with really clear measurement of why they're doing what they're doing. And so Stefan and Aisha inspire me. The third is actually my brother, Brian, a younger brother. I'm the oldest of 7. Brian's somewhere in the middle, and he is the CEO of a rapidly growing coffee company that both has retail cafes and roasts their own coffee and wholesales it called Summit Coffee. Really inspirational from a purpose-driven leadership standpoint. And you see behind me this notion of fun with purpose, which I try to think about as I run our team. He lives fun with purpose. And the final one that I think you would love to talk to, Jonathan's a guy by the name of Russell Gong. And Russell's the CEO of a company called Cabinet Health. And Cabinet Health is trying to modernize healthcare in a lot of ways, most notably to try to eliminate single-use plastic in healthcare, particularly with things like prescription bottles. And Russell was a mentee of mine at Deloitte. And, when Russell decided to leave, I had a bunch, and Russell was a great performer. A bunch of people came to me and said, Dan, how can you let one of your mentees who's so talented leave the firm? What a failure. And my answer was, what a success. Our job at a place like Deloitte isn't to grow partners in Deloitte. It's to grow leaders. And maybe 1 out of 12 of those leaders is going to end up spending a couple decades or more at Deloitte. Most of them are going to use their Deloitte experience as a platform to go be magical somewhere else. And Russell's taken his platform and built one of the most innovative, fast-growing healthcare companies in the world right now.
Well, you touched on some fascinating points. And firstly, thank you for 4 fascinating people, including the couple. And it's lovely that you are proud of your brother and would love to let him share his fun with passion and the work he does with his coffee. And I think this idea about letting people grow and fly as alumni is really healthy. I was just coaching the CEO of one of the big global supermarket companies just before this call. And we were talking about, how much to invest in developing his people. And I said, there's that famous line that, yes, you could coach and mentor and develop these people, spend a lot of money on them, and they would leave. But how about this? You don't coach and develop and mentor them, and they stay. Like, it's the worst. And the whole point is that it's a great accolade for you that someone goes off and does something else with all that they've learned there. And it is interesting talking to, I've got 4 children who are all married now, and I've got 2 grandchildren and a third on the way next month. Very exciting time, a granddaughter just coming. But their generation look at PwC, Deloitte, EY, KPMG, and they go, yes, I know I could stay in and become a partner on $1 million a year or whatever, but why would I work all the hours these partners do? I'm not going to stay for 20, 30 years. I want to get some experience for 3, 4 years max, and then I'm going to move on to something else and then something else. I just want a series of experiences, because unlike your generation, I won't be able to have as much in my life, but I'm going to have experiences. And when talking to a few partners in professional services firms, whether it's the same for you in America, I don't know, but certainly in the UK, it's quite a challenge keeping the talented ones in to see that this is a life for you. But the work-life balance for these guys, they get paid a lot of money, but I don't like the work-life balance they have. What do you think, Dan? Is this a problem, or you're really easy about it?
Oh, well, the perception is 100% a problem. I happen to believe, both in my own life, which I know really well, and in the lives of many, many, many of my partners, that we allow a perception of imbalance to permeate the way people see us, when in reality, I will tell you, Jonathan, I think I have more flexibility and more ability to focus on my own well-being and the well-being of my family than any senior executive anywhere. And so we, as very senior executives who have platforms that people observe, I think need to be really intentional about showing how fulfilled we are, at least how fulfilled I am in so many ways. And so one of the things I say, Jonathan, is I tell our people, Deloitte's well-being is less important than your well-being. So if you're in a situation where you feel like you're making a choice between your well-being and ours, I want you to choose yours every time. And that actually is a pretty powerful way to articulate in clear terms the trade-offs. And I want you to choose you if it's really a trade-off. And my view on that is that if you do that, A, you engender trust, and then over time, you have healthier, more loyal, more focused, and more well-balanced people on your team. And that's good for everyone.
Yeah, yeah. And there's no doubt about it, the experience of various consultants I've spoken to, some are workaholics and their bosses, and they will work all hours and send messages when they're on holiday, and just they never seem to be off. But others, it takes courage, but they go, why would I hire you and then do your job for you? Like, I need to trust you, and I need to mentor you and see this as teachable moments and things I can teach you. But there are the obsessives who get them into working till 11 at night and then in very early the next morning. But that's just poor leaders who are paranoid, and you'll get them everywhere. But sometimes it can really destroy other people. And so you're quite right. You have to look after your own health and well-being so that you can serve your clients the best and also have some fun, like you're doing, fun with purpose. You were talking about your life. Let's just have a chat about your life, Dan, because it would be quite interesting. What experiences have shaped you, the leader we experience today as the CEO of Deloitte Consulting for the whole of America? How did life begin? As you say, you're the oldest of 7 children. That must have been very interesting. Who shaped and who influenced you on the way?
Yeah, look, I'm fortunate to have incredible parents, Tom and Mary Sue, and my dad was an HR professional. My mom was an elementary teacher, and they're incredible in lots of ways. But the best way to describe it is how we went from me being the oldest of 4 to me being the oldest of 7. And that was my parents deciding to adopt 3 siblings, all from unique and, fair to say, quite challenging life circumstances. And the resilience, the view of service, the lens of inclusion and making it real based on the dynamics of those 3 of my siblings' lives, like, incredibly powerful. And so I learned a lot in that way. So that's sort of big influence 1. And then big influence 2 was I was a very competitive footballer in the proper global sense, not the American football sense. And when you're a really competitive footballer, you learn a ton about leadership in the context of team, and you learn a ton about individual resilience navigating very different circumstances when you love your coach and circumstances when you hate your coach, circumstances where you are playing 90 minutes a match and circumstances where you only play once every 6 matches, even though you think you should be in there. Like probably Ollie Watkins did prior to him coming in to score a magical game winner in the semifinal against the Netherlands. And so the orientation of sport to eventually leading was a huge influence on me. And then the final one is I've always been the youngest to do lots of things. The youngest to go to graduate school, the youngest to be a speaker at my church as a 10-year-old, the youngest to be a CEO. And you learn a lot about how to overcome people's skepticism based on age by virtue of developing your own confidence and your own mechanisms by which you realize that you can earn people's trust through content and credibility, even if the first impression is, what the heck is this kid doing here?
Yeah. Well, look, what an amazing life. And your dad, Tom, did you say your mum was Mary Sue? Did I hear that
Mary
right?
Sue.
I mean, as I know with my own mother, who, on our way back from church, she'd stop and pick up a lady who was shuffling along with two hat carrier bags in like some Beatles song and saying, where are you having lunch? And the lady would say, well, I haven't got any lunch. I'm just living homeless. And she said, well, you're having lunch with us. And so the three boys would shuffle across and she'd get into the car with us, complete with the strong stench of urine and the clothes that she'd slept in for the last 2 months, without judgment by us or laughing or giggling or making snide comments. It just wasn't what we did. But for your parents to take on and adopt people who were from different backgrounds, different races, and with disability, that was really amazing. Have you, what is the story of your adopted children? What backgrounds did they come from, and what disabilities did they carry?
I mean, you described it well, and they all have their own life story, and all of those life stories, as they all reach medium adulthood in their 30s and 40s, are very positive stories. But yeah, we became a multiracial family, and that's a pretty powerful thing to go from being a single racial family to a multiracial family. And so we learned those lessons. When you told the story, Jonathan, of coming back from church, it reminded me, one of the things my parents always did was try to find people who, for some reason, couldn't be with their families on the U.S. holiday of Thanksgiving, which is a big family holiday in the U.S., and invite them into our home. And so we got used to having people we'd never met having a Thanksgiving meal with us, which is very different to the tradition. And so I've carried that on in many ways in my family. And one of the funniest things, I think it's funny, some people thought I was crazy, that I ever did, was I was leading our government business in Washington, D.C., and one year I sent a Happy Thanksgiving note to the practice, and actually said in the note from the CEO of the practice, if anyone doesn't have family and needs a place to go for Thanksgiving, come to my house. And this distribution list of 20,000 people.
Wow.
And sure enough, we end up with, I think, 4 people that I'd never met who were on my team, having Thanksgiving dinner with my wife, my mother-in-law, and my 4 kids. And it was a pretty powerful experience.
Yeah, you won't forget that. But also, like, I never forgot my mother and her behavior. She's sadly long dead, but her kindness. And when she had a second stroke and she was in a nursing home, the little old lady who'd shuffled along came and found her. She heard about her being in there. She went to visit my mum, who was, paralyzed down one side and couldn't, various things were not working. But that was a lovely reversal of roles. And I've never forgotten that. It's stayed with me as a, people can hear lots of things from us as parents, or any parents, but they judge you often on your actions, not what your fine words are. I was just thinking, it's a fascinating area that you're in, obviously, as a very keen footballer, and you are now at Georgetown University. You're doing the broadcasting for them and the play-by-play football. Firstly, Georgetown, I'm listening to a lot about the founding of America, and I'm listening to Benjamin Franklin. It's about 24 hours worth of audiobook. Fascinating. But I was thinking about this whole area of football and how we look at the players, and there's one of our players, the captain of the English team, playing for a German team, and he's on 25 million a year before he gets all his sponsorship deals. And yeah, I'm thinking of your mum, if she was doing her teaching. You know, my daughter one stage taught, she's now working somewhere else. Someone else I know who's doing nursing for people in the final stages of their life. And I go, they're paid a pittance, and a footballer's paid 25 million. Have we lost a sense of perspective? And then you've got the case of the Dallas Cowboy cheerleaders on Netflix. So there's a program about them, but they get paid in comparison to the players so little, and they don't get paid for their makeup and their hair and all that kind of stuff. They have to appear looking immaculate. And this inequality in different roles and different what society values and pays. With your upbringing, I just wonder, do you see that kind of mismatch, and what can we do about it?
That's a loaded set of questions that have lots of roots and lots of potential solutions. Do we have a mismatch? In some ways, but we also have markets, and markets in many ways function, pretty well. And Harry Kane happens to be in a market that generates massive amounts of the economy and creates massive amounts of the economy. And so his wages are a distribution of that economic success in that economic environment. And so I don't find that to be a mismatch. The fairness of whether markets value certain things more or less than they should is certainly an interesting conversation that has a lot of deeply rooted culture and sociological and historical roots by country and by region.
Yeah, I mean it's like an essay at university. Discuss. I threw that one out there because it's one that I always wonder about. But look, thank you. It was a tricky one. I didn't want to sort of just throw googly in there, but I think it is an interesting one. Let's just talk about something more personal for you rather than a generic question like this. I find I've made a lot of mistakes in my life, and I remember some head wiser than mine said, I learned so much from my mistakes. I think I'll go out and make a few more. But in your life, dark moments teach us something powerful. What was a dark moment for you personally, or for you in your profession, where you learned an awful lot from it, but it was a really dark moment for you?
I mean, like you said, there are plenty of dark moments. I will not say I've had a dark period in life, and I feel incredibly blessed to have not had a dark period in life. But I've certainly had dark moments. It's interesting. Before I share them, what I'll give you philosophically is, I actually think failure is a misused word in this context. I think failure is pretty dramatic. And, we go to school, you and I, Jonathan, and I never failed a class. Fail carries with it this finality to it. And I think that's overdone. I think there's lots of lessons learned that emerge from things that didn't go very well. But I actually think we set ourselves back when we think of them as fundamental failures. But dark moments, look, I went an entire season as a collegiate footballer never getting in a game. practicing every match, practicing before every match. And I went through the process of sulking and feeling like I was being treated unfairly, to having the realization that I still had a role to play. And if I was going to live up to what I would like people to think of me as a selfless, as a team-centric person, then sulking was doing no one any good, and sulking was self-centered.
Yeah.
And so I think I was a really important part of a team in which I did not participate in a match. And then what happens the next season? Someone gets hurt. Dan goes in. Dan has great relationships with his teammates, and Dan becomes a really important part of the team from then forward. So, that's one. And then, the first time I got fired by a client is probably the second. It was a pretty high profile situation that, for sort of security purposes, I can't talk about with specificity, but it was a pretty high profile situation. And our team made a mistake. The client themselves was a bit of an insecure leader, wanted someone to blame it on. And Dan was the chosen person to blame it on. And how I went through the process of, this is so unfair. How could they be saying this about me? How could they be doing this to me? And then swallowing that reaction and realizing that we need to play the long game, and professional experiences aren't always fair, taught me a lot. And, to this day, I see lots of senior leaders who have rabbit ears, who are listening all the time for criticism, whether it's from inside their walls or outside their walls, and who react in very dramatic ways to that criticism. I have found a way to not have that affect me in any way.
I think that's so interesting, and it triggers for me sometimes in the dark moments, or like you on the bench there, where you decided, rather than to sulk and feel it was unfair and why wasn't I on the team, to use it as an opportunity to show that you were a good team player, that one day your moment would come, but you're going to play your part. And I love that. And in my own way, I remember that I joined the British Army as a young officer just at the time when we had 1982. This is some years ago. We had the Falklands War, and everybody trains as an army officer to go to war and be in battle. Get your military cross, be brave, lead your men, have courage in moments when others are scared or whatever it is. But be a good leader. And I wasn't in a unit that went to the war, and I was so disappointed. But actually now, years later, when I look back at friends of mine or people who are not here because they were killed in that war, or the Iraq War, or Afghanistan, met so many servicemen who've been disabled and blown up by IEDs supplied by Iran, very kindly, by the Iranian Revolutionary Guard. I think I had a lucky escape. But I thought at the time I was so unlucky to not go and do those things. So sometimes things work out for the best, but at the time it's very hard to see that. And you can only be, as I was, selfishly self-absorbed, thinking this is not fair, and I wish I was somebody else. I wish I was doing what they were doing, or they appear to have the dream life, when actually behind the scenes, many of the people who've been prepared to have dream lives, it's a complete sham, and their lives are utter wreck, but they're just putting on a good face.
Yeah.
Does that resonate?
It does. And look, my oldest daughter, I have 2 boys and 2 girls. My oldest daughter would say the most impactful piece of parenting advice I've given her, which draws from what we're talking about now, is don't let the highs be too high and the lows be too low. Like so much stress and anxiety comes from significant sine waves of difference in how you experience things. And oftentimes I'm giving her that advice in the context of her football career, but it's also in the context of, life and society more broadly.
So that so resonates with me. I've just come back from about a month ago, an 11-day silent Buddhist Vipassana retreat, learning meditation. And as I studied before I went, the Buddha and his approach to universal truths in life, one of them very relevant for Deloitte with its change consulting, which is that the impermanence is a universal statement, that life is full of impermanence. Things rise up and they pass away, and they rise up and they pass away. And when a man stands in a stream and then steps out and stands in again, neither are the same. The stream's moved on, cells in the man's body have died, new cells have been born. That he's not the same as he was even a few seconds ago. And that's one that's helped me a lot to realize that change is inevitable, that we're all dying every day, and just eventually the final moment comes. So to have a good life and a good death, as the Stoics teach us, I quite try and aspire to that. Having lost my brother David, who died a couple of years ago of metastatic cancer, it brought it home very strongly to me. And then the second theme that comes through is that the Buddha, in his observation 2,500 years ago, wondered why people were miserable, why there was so much unhappiness. And he saw it as two things. One is craving for things that you haven't got, that you want to have, the nice things in life, that you like more of those, and an aversion to facing the difficult things in life. And both those two things lead to unhappiness, misery, and sadness. And if we can have this wonderful idea of the middle place of equanimity, it is what it is. This is what the reality is. Doesn't mean you give up and you're just completely passive, but you're more at peace with what goes on. And it's taken me to 62 to get there, but I am generally more at peace and less over anxious about craving this, or overstressed and worried about something else coming down the road. It is what it is. I don't know. Does that have any triggers for you? Any thoughts for you?
Well, first of all, it's a beautiful thing. Second of all, when you lead a team of, close to 100,000 people, as I do, what you realize is that the majority of people have not had the discovery that you've had. And therefore, they walk around with anxieties and stresses and insecurities that I wish I could wave a magic wand and give them a way to minimize those, because it's quite a burden.
Yes. And I think back, like you, sporting wise, I was very competitive. Mine was long distance running, mountain marathons, triathlons, the airborne training, things like that. But I for various anxiety reasons, probably been highly competitive, highly comparative, always trying to be in control of the situation, because I didn't want to get it out of control. So I always wanted to master it and know what was going to happen next. And as I get on later in life, I realized how little I do control. I think there's a bishop in Westminster Abbey, and around his tomb is carved a story which goes along the lines: when I was a young man, I thought I could change the world. As I got a bit older, I thought, well, perhaps I'll just change my country, and then I'll be able to change the world. And as I got older still, I thought, well, perhaps if I just changed my town, that might change my country, might change the world. And as I got older still, I thought, well, if I just change my family, then I can do the other things. And now, as I come to the end of my life, I realize perhaps if I just changed myself first, that might have in turn influenced my family, and maybe the village I lived in and the town I lived in, and who knows, the world. But I think this thing about the thing you can control, controlling the controllables,
Yeah.
your own thoughts and your own actions, and even doing the meditation, 10 hours a day of meditation, and not being able to speak to anybody for 10 days, passing them by without communicating. A lot of stuff goes through your mind. and it's a very powerful uprooting and purging process of all the crap you've accumulated over the years, which you worry about who you'd hurt and who'd hurt you, and slights that I'd had 40 years ago, which came vividly through my mind as I was bored. So I do recommend it to people if they've got the guts to do it.
There's a reason why Michael Jackson wrote the song "Man in the Mirror."
Yes.
If you actually absorb that, it's in many ways in the spirit of what you just described.
Yeah.
Just in the form of music, as opposed to poetry.
I'm going to go back and have a listen to the lyrics of that, because there's a Yorkshire version of the man in the glass. He talks about that, if you can cope with looking at the man in the glass and really see yourself for the first time for who you are, and be at ease with it, it's going to be quite a journey. These things we seem to learn too late in life. What was the old New York Jewish saying? Too soon old, too late smart. And I think sometimes, as I laugh with my daughters, my 30-year-old daughter said to me, "Daddy, when you grow up, what are you going to be?" I said, "I'm 62. She said, "Yeah, I know, but you're still growing up." And I thought it's a very true statement. But thinking back to, you've got your own children, and there's people listening who've got their own children, and who knows, maybe some teenagers in the 130 countries around the world who listen to this might be taking this away. But if you went back and saw the young Dan, what advice do you wish you could give to yourself back then, that this matters and this is really not at all important? What two bits to balance it out would you give to yourself?
Well, first of all, Jonathan, Dan's still pretty young, so I still feel young. But younger Dan, I think I'd say, and this is a sort of a form of advice that I was given, which is spend more time with people just because. And the reason people were telling me that is, at an earlier point in my career, the pace at which I processed, the intensity with which I tried to get stuff done, was extraordinarily productive. It also was extraordinarily intimidating for those around me, and I was completely missing the beauty of unscheduled moments, the beauty of relationships forming outside the context of task. And I think that was really important for me to learn.
Wow. That so really hits home to me as someone who was the over anxious overachiever, always on the go, always doing the next thing on my list, and ticking off the metaphorical tick list, and thinking, in this meeting, am I getting something from this? Is this adding value to my life? Or like that famous line, that was a wasted 60 minutes of my life. Well, fool on me, really, because it probably wasn't if I was thinking of it in the right way. So I really love that one. Thank you. Moral quotient is the first of the 8 components of some work that my wife and I have done over the last 20 years about what makes high-performing leaders and teams. It's our Inspiring Leadership Compass on the website jonathanperks.com. And the true north that when I was at Harvard, Bill George, and the teaching we got from Bill George about true north and your morals and your principles and your values. I wonder, what did you learn, Dan, when you let your values slip? Because we're never perfect. I'd be surprised if you've never let your values slip, because I know many times I have. But what did you learn when you let them slip?
Yeah, it's back to sort of a conversation we had before. I don't know that I've thought about it in the way of value slippage. Are there moments in which that I reflect on a situation and say, boy, I was I think of myself and have values around team and selflessness, and I just made a choice that at the end of the day was pretty self-centered. Yeah, I've certainly had moments like that. And I think self-awareness is one of the most important attributes that any of us can have in life, and certainly those of us who get the privilege to lead at scale. And so I hope I've had the self-awareness to do that.
I think you touched on something that resonates for me. And I remember again from some of the Buddha's teaching that when you have a stimulus, you then have a response. And if you've got no control over things, stimulus, and immediately you respond. But actually, he's almost like separated them and say, just observe what's going on. And so often I would get, I don't know, someone cuts you up in traffic. I'd left the 11-day course. I was 20 minutes driving home and someone cut me up. And I beeped the horn. I thought, well, that was a great course, wasn't it? How did that work? And I thought, but then I was almost instantaneously aware. Whereas the old me might have been annoyed and angry with this person cutting me up and almost causing me to crash for about 20 minutes, maybe 2 or 3 hours. But as we get more, as you said, self-aware, it happens closer and closer to the moment that it's gone on. And you went, that could have been a doctor going to an emergency. Someone's just been told their father's dying. They've got to get there quickly. I don't know what's going on for them. Who am I to judge them? Let it go. And I smiled about it. The fact that I got it wrong by beeping my horn was just to be aware earlier than we normally would have been, I suppose.
Yeah, well said. I don't think your beeping the horn was a value slippage, Jonathan. So you can be okay. I would say on the topic of values, the thing I find myself continuously reflecting on, and frankly, I view myself as a constant leader in training, is where do values and culture globally intersect? And the more you spend time, which I know you do, and certainly I do in this position, in extraordinarily interesting parts of the world that are founded on very different traditions and have very histories that if you're not from those places, it's very hard for you to truly understand. And how, whether the way you're consuming a situation is that it's a mismatch in values between you and people in that culture, or is it actually just a difference in culture that you're misidentifying as a difference in values, is something I think about all the time. And again, I have no answer to that, but I think it's a really important thing for leaders who spend their time in many different places globally to be on the lookout for.
Yeah, I love that. And the fact that with values and culture, the happiest CEOs that I coach and their teams is where their personal values and the values they espouse for their business are aligned. And the culture follows on naturally from that you see them living it. And it's not what they say, the rhetoric, which is often fine, words on a wall in a big world famous bank. And then I found everybody was actually doing the opposite. And I go, but actually where there's alignment, that's so rare. It's so special that people love to work for those kind of companies. And when people find that their values are at loggerheads with what the organization's doing, that is the time to go, this is not the right place for me. I need to move. It's like when you're working for a white collar psychopath. You won't change them. You need to emigrate to avoid them. Just get out of there. I don't think, because people time and again, they sell their souls. And I've seen them do this, and clients have told me about it, that they're working for somebody and they are a narcissistic, Machiavellian, subclinical psychopath, and they're still working there. I say, you are just selling your soul. You won't change them. You need to move. The next one around the compass is purpose, meaning and purpose, PQ as we call it. And I loved your fun with purpose on the sign behind you. So those listening on different audio will not see your amazing room with lots of sporting memorabilia, but also the fun with purpose, which you mentioned your brother has. In the work you do, both in Deloitte Consulting as the CEO, but in also your broadcasting and Georgetown University, what gives your life meaning and purpose? Oh, and very quickly, Georgetown University, was that Georgetown named after one of the King Georges in England?
It was.
Yeah, which one was it?
Old,
George first?
the oldest university in the U.S. by some measures, 1789, founded by a John Carroll. So it's been around a while.
Yeah, fantastic. Yeah, what gives your life meaning and purpose then, Dan?
Service, and the belief that things I do or things I catalyze can positively impact the lives of people I will never meet.
Wow. Yeah.
And it's really interesting. I that was something I realized as my life and career have evolved. We often, for obvious reasons, measure the impact we're having based on tangible things we can observe in people that we know, right? People in your family, you lead a team and you're hands-on involved with helping the person on your team achieve this professional milestone, and you can feel it. And what's been a real realization for me about my purpose is actually to positively influence the lives of people I will never meet. And, and so how do you experience that? You experience it when, like, I have, 40,000 something teammates in India, and I was there last year, and someone I'd never met comes up to me in a hallway, someone probably in their mid to late 20s, and says, "You changed my life."
Wow.
And I say, "I've no idea who you are, and this will probably be the last time we ever see each other." And what the story she told me was that I've been so dogmatic in public about this notion that I want you focused on your own well-being above Deloitte's, and if there's a trade-off, I always want you to choose you. That she said, I got to spend the last month of my father's life with him, and I was leaning towards not doing it because we had big client milestones coming up, and no one was giving me the advice to focus on me. And I heard you speak on a big town hall, and I saw the look on your eyes and how much you believed it. And I chose to tell my manager that I needed to be somewhere else. And that's, some people talk about the burdens of leadership at scale. To me, it's an extraordinary privilege. If part of your purpose is to serve and to influence the lives of significant amounts of people, then it's a really cool way to think about the impact you can have.
I love that story. I find it very moving. And I just want to add to it with another story which really touched my lives, and I've passed it on, and I hope it's touched the lives of many others. I was lucky enough to interview a lady called Dame Tessa Jowell. She was an MP. She was dying of a brain tumor when I interviewed her for my book, Inspiring Leadership. And I said, what is one bit of advice you'd pass on from, in this last stages of your life? And she said, Jonathan, it's always be where you're irreplaceable. And I said, what do you mean? And she said, I'm the mother of my children. Only I can go and be at some play or some event as the mother. I can't send along someone else or a nurse or the palliative care doctor. I've got to be there when I can. And there were times when I needed to be in the House of Parliament for something, or there was a bill or whatever it is. But there's some moments when only you can be there. So it's always stayed with me, always be where you're irreplaceable.
It's a beautiful reflection. Let me give you a twist on it and reaction that I'll be curious your reaction to it, which is, and try to not make yourself irreplaceable at work very often.
Yeah.
Because that's actually what I end up coaching people on is, if you make yourself irreplaceable, or I tend to use the word indispensable, and you view that as a badge of honor professionally, well, guess what? You then are preventing someone else from growing into that situation and growing in their own career. B, you're preventing your own career flexibility because you're irreplaceable in place A, so you can't go to place to place B. And so it's really interesting. I love the beauty of that from a personal standpoint, and I want people to apply it with a slightly different context when they think about it professionally.
I so agree. And she meant it completely for personally, that she was prioritizing that over her professional life as a member of parliament, with all the responsibility, and a minister in the cabinet, that was the top priority, that she had to be there, particularly as she was in the last few months of her life. She realized that times she hadn't done that, and she wished that she had. And the 5 regrets of the dying are always, by Bonnie Weir, are always some that I would encourage people to listen to, because they're incredibly powerful. And we haven't got time for them now, but they're well worth you listening to when you've got a moment. Now, we sadly close to the end of our time, and there's been so much that we can talk about, Dan. But before we finish, I'd like to just do a couple of questions and then a top tip. Executive teams and toxic teams, we'll talk about that, and a favorite book. So you have been in football teams, you've been in teams in Deloitte and all other careers that you've had, and working with client teams. If you were to give a top tip about turning around a toxic team or a toxic individual or whatever, what is your top tip on that?
You have to set an expectation and a culture and live up to it, that integrity is greater than on pitch or quantifiable business performance, and you have to live up to it when moments of toxicity show up. So what does that mean practically? It means that I will apply the same standards to a questionable judgment that person A, who's a mediocre performer, makes, than person B, who's the #1 salesperson at Deloitte. Because as soon as you start allowing on-field performance to create different sets of standards, then you lose credibility and you lose culture, and it's very hard to claw that back as a leader.
Yeah. Humans, there's something primeval about us as humans, fairness. And they think it goes back to when, let's say, your family, Dan, and mine were in a cave, a Stone Age people, and I'd been out hunting and I'd brought back a deer, and I divided it up with my family and your family. We'd eaten it and scoffed it because, of course, there was no refrigeration, so we had to eat it quickly and cook it. But then you went out hunting and you caught a deer, but you didn't share it with my family. Well, we're going to die. We're going to die because we've not got food, and we were expecting you to share. And so I think this sense of inconsistent application and lack of fairness goes very deep in the human psyche. And if ever there's a level of conflict that I've come across, it's when people feel that things are just not fair. And time and again, I've got stories of that. Thank you for that, Dan. Finally, favorite book before we talk about a top tip. So what book would you recommend on the topic of leadership that's a good listen or a good read?
Well, my favorite book is a book called The Brothers K by David James Duncan. It's this incredible book about a amazing dysfunctional family, but it's not a book about leadership. So that's my bonus recommendation. A book about leadership. The Captain Class is a book by a friend of mine, Sam Walker. Sam was a reporter at the Wall Street Journal, and he sought to try to understand what the best sports dynasties in athletic history have in common. And he didn't have a hypothesis. He went and tried to study it, analytically and empirically. And I'm talking about things ranging from the New Zealand All Blacks rugby to Cuban women's volleyball team to the Chicago Bulls to the U.S. women's national football team to Barcelona in the Puyol days. So there's about 15 dynasties that he studied. And somewhat shockingly to him, the number one attribute they had in common was the characteristics of the captain. Hence the name Captain Class. And the characteristics of the captain relative to servant leadership, relative to sort of how they showed up, was the number one commonality. And so the book describes, 10 or so of those attributes. But it's really fascinating because what the captains didn't have in common is some of them were the best players on the team, and some of them were not. So that's not actually one of the attributes they have in common, is actually this other set of attributes. So really, really well researched and really well written book by Sam.
I will look forward to reading it. Thank you for that. So finally, Dan, would you introduce who you are, the role you do, and share your practical top leadership tip for us? And that will finish us off very nicely.
I'm Dan Helfrich, CEO of Deloitte Consulting, happily married, father of 4, and brother to 7. And my number one tip is horseshoes are greater than circles. Horseshoes open, you visualize it, circles close. So many leaders and so many teams try to create a circle. And what happens with a circle is, over time, good ideas and different perspectives can't get in, and good ideas and different perspectives and people can't get out. And my advice as you're forming teams is make sure you're thinking about it as a horseshoe. If you do, you will be more inclusive. You will have more diverse perspectives, and you'll create more mobility for people. And as an aside, Jonathan, I think in our world, if we had people living in a way that they saw it as a horseshoe more than a circle, we'd have far less polarity in our discourse than we do today.
Wow. I love that as a tip. Horseshoes are greater than circles. I will remember that one. Dan, thank you very much for being on the Inspiring Leadership podcast. It's been an absolute joy having you. For you to make time while being the CEO of Deloitte Consulting America, with all the leaders you have to lead, almost 100,000 people. It's a great honor to us to have you here. So thank you for sharing your wisdom and your life experiences.
Cheers.